Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful, real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter to succeed. CyberSaint continuous control automation ingests data from the IT GRC stack to update controls against regulatory requirements and risks in real time, delivering insights and visibility. See how members of the Fortune 500 are saving millions annually by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSaint.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Adrian Sanabria and Lee Neely. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herkovic, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on World Pass and main conference registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register now. Join us August 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern to learn how to implement cloud security that actually works. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register now. If you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, off to the articles this week, gentlemen. I started with this article. Mark Andreessen is the one who wrote the op-ed around why software is going to eat the world. And here we are 10 years later, and it pretty much happened that way. Like, there's not much of a debate about where we are from a software perspective. But where I wanted to take this article a little bit is two things. One, if software is eating the world, are we spending enough time in application security? Number one. But number two, what's next? What eats software? Thoughts, gentlemen?
Yeah, so I mean, to me, saying software is eating the world is kind of like saying, bread took over the world because, it fueled armies who built an empire or something like that. Like, sure, software was important, but it wasn't the only piece. Like it was business changing as well. Business being in a position where it's more agile, more risk-taking, and software was certainly a component of that. And in the original essay, he actually goes into, what he considers the essential elements of what these new companies need, and what's going to result in disruption in these different industries. But I think that helps answer that question of what's next is looking at that bigger picture. A company's ability to introduce a new feature every 6 weeks or something like that, instead of, once a year or once every couple of years, for example.
Oh, the whole idea of taking the action of buying an IT system, forklifting it in place, strapping 17 sysadmins to it to get it online quickly, and then your application going, just got completely turned on its head with the cloud model, and so much enabling software had to be created. I mean, it is crazy amazing. If you look at it, if we had been talking about what you could do now, provisioning a system 30 years ago, you would have thought we were on drugs or complete dreamers. And I think the future challenge is how do we reduce some of the overhead of getting at that last mile. That's where it's going to, I think, go next. But then I don't know.
Yeah, I think about the cloud and no code and low code, and does cloud start to eat software? If we think about what Amazon's been doing with Fargate and Lambda, I mean, you could see some interesting things there from a cloud perspective. And what's the evolution of software with true artificial intelligence, not all the the FUD that all the security guys throw around. But I mean, like true artificial intelligence, like self-learning systems and moving forward. I mean, there's some interesting things. We made a lot of progress in the last 10 years. And the reason I brought this up is because we got to think about what's coming next. Where do my security thoughts and strategies need to think about the next 10 years? I think it's application security stays forefront. Cloud security is a part of that. But then do we think about virtual reality and artificial intelligence as those next frontiers that we're eventually going to have to figure out some solutions around?
Yeah.
So I think, if we take a look at software eating the world being largely, or at least the outcome that's such a big deal to businesses is speed, the ability to shift your business and to change based on, different variables occurring. I think the future becomes being able to predict what those changes are going to be, what those new trends are going to be. Like right now, is Twitter the place that you want to market and advertise? How sales and marketing works and evolves is always kind of this guessing game of let's try a little bit of everything and just kind of see what sticks. And then within each of those, what's the right way to do it? Is it text only, or do we use video? Do we use audio? So I think a big chunk going forward, at least, and especially on the ad side and the sales and marketing side, which drive a lot of the industry, right? From Tesla's selling cars direct now. They kind of buck that whole dealership thing. That is the first step for anything that's making money, is that sales and marketing piece, and how you do it, predicting what the upcoming trends are going to be, where you want to be standing, where you want to spend marketing and ad revenue. I think that's going to be really big, figuring that out.
Well, like what Uber and Lyft did to the taxi industry, right? I mean, these kind of trends that are all software enabled are driving like shifts in the way we travel, the way we buy things, the way we get from point A to point B. It's software has been a big driver of that.
And to predict that, you would have, for Uber and Lyft, you'd have to predict how important and ubiquitous the smartphone would become, which Mark Andreessen actually does predict in his original essay. He says he predicted at least 5 billion people worldwide would own smartphones in 10 years. And in 9, over 6 billion had smartphones. So he actually undercut it.
Right. You also need to watch where you're investing. Look what happened to the banks that were backing up medallion loans thanks to Lyft and Uber and the like. That's now, junk bond type stuff. It used to be a really solid investment. Oh, yeah. But what I was also thinking of in the future is the idea of, serverless, dedicated, resourceless operation. Imagine if your stuff runs wherever the hell it is when it's needed. How do you get your security arms around that? That could really stand the equation on its head, if you really didn't have dedicated resources under your IT anymore. And it's moving around closer to wherever the user is. But I could see that as a possible future.
Yeah, for sure. The second article talks about the art of problem solving. A little bit into this, right? We're not going to solve all this today, but if you like to problem solve, security leaders, what are some guidelines and guidance? And it's funny, it talks about puzzles and crossword puzzles and things like that. And one of the things I do now that my son's at college, we play word games, right? And I think it's a very interesting way to, continue to problem solve in a different way. We get so wrapped around the axle sometimes with the day-to-day work activities. Things like crossword puzzles or words with friends, which is what I play with my son and my wife. It keeps you sharp. It keeps you thinking about how to strategize and solve problems and win, which is always the fun part of games, right? But this article then talks about why these crossword puzzles are so good for security leaders to really help them with problem solving.
So I think what's different about crosswords that you don't find with stuff like solitaire and Sudoku and stuff like that, like those are big on pattern matching, but crosswords also rely heavily on knowledge. So you're using your long-term memory quite a bit, which you also do in a lot of business roles. So yeah, I think that's the big thing that where crosswords differ from other stuff is, if you only read security books, you're not going to be good at the typical New York Times crossword. Like, you got to know some pop culture, you got to be well read, you got to know something about sports. It kind of forces you to be well rounded.
Yes.
Well, I actually was thinking about, could I do a parallel between the crossword puzzle, because that is great. So not just cognitive ability. There's a bunch of background knowledge you're going to leverage. I was wondering if I could compare that with your trivial games, because that's similarly relying on a lot of deep-seated knowledge, but it's also, I don't know. I'm going back and forth whether it's equivalent, but I think the whole idea.
But you're missing the pattern matching piece with trivia. You're missing that pattern matching piece.
Yeah.
With trivia, right?
Right. I said, but exercise that mental muscle is key. I mean, no matter, don't go stale.
Yeah,
that's bad.
Yeah, if we're just doing email and Teams all day, our brains are going to turn into goo.
Yeah. Agreed.
Just saying.
Games are important.
Yeah, exactly right. Let your top performers move around the organization. We were talking a little bit last segment with Ben about the types of CISOs, right? And whether you come from the business side or the technical side. Well, part of that is because you've moved into these other areas of the business, right? A technical CISO is never going to learn about the other aspects of business unless they're working with the other business folks. They may not move into that business unit, but some do. For example, you might move to a completely different team. And this HBR article talks about letting top talent move around and how do you create a culture around the mobility, because that cross-pollination of your employees and those skill sets are good for employee development, not employee retention.
If you love somebody, set them free, right?
Right.
Well, we lose people to other parts of the business we're in, and we have acquired folks from other parts of the business as well. Moving them around to keep them engaged rather than lose them entirely is definitely tried and true. But I would also add to your top performers to make sure they give them all the reins they need to do what they're interested in, because they're likely to be able to do their current stuff and investigate new stuff or build relationships in other parts of the business. We have the luxury of being in cyber where everybody's coming to us for how to do things, which also gives us an awesome opportunity to find about what they're trying to do out in the programmatic mission side of your business, where you may not be directly exposed to what's important to them, or have a chance to ask them why this harebrained idea to me is actually really important and could be very cool, and you got to leverage those opportunities, and your top performers will have those conversations, but we all need to have them, and we might find something we didn't even think we needed to support or figure out how to do.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that ties into this point. Think of talent mobility as a lattice, not a ladder. What does a lattice do? It ties things together, right?
Yeah.
If I've got people that have worked in my group now working for another group, I've instantly established a relationship. Now I can start to bridge gaps. I can start to build that lattice, and we can open up transparency and dialogue and communications to actually do things better. Don't just think of it as a ladder, like you get from point A to point C. It is much more inclusive than just a ladder approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this is especially tough. It's a thinking type that we got to break some management out of, and some owners. Especially in consulting firms. If somebody's making you a lot of money performing a certain service, then the tendency is to just have them keep doing that indefinitely. But they're not going to want to do that indefinitely in most cases. And what you end up with is, I've been in a lot of firms where there's somebody who's really good at AppSec, but then what happens when they're busy on an engagement and you've got 2 or 3 others that you need to kick off, and you really need a good AppSec person, you're going to end up, throwing somebody else that way that has, is not as good or doesn't have any exposure to AppSec, and folks aren't going to be happy with their work. So, yeah, I mean, it naturally makes sense, but in an organization that's kind of short-sighted, it's a tough battle.
Yeah.
Well, you're making me laugh. I'm thinking about the work teaching somebody to fill your shoes. I'm trying to cross-train some folks in some of the stuff I do, and I look at it and I realize what was simple for me is actually kind of complicated. Wow.
Yeah.
That is true. Like running a podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, next one. Top CISO's 15 top strategies for 2021. Now, look, there's probably nothing really, really surprising in here because I think we've covered the majority of this before. A couple newer trends have trickled up since the beginning of the year around supply chain and ransomware, obviously. But as I'm going through this list, I'm sitting here going, okay, so number one says focus on fundamentals. What the hell does that mean? Like, what fundamentals? Right? We talk cyber hygiene, we talk fundamentals, but what is that really at the end of the day? Right? Is it asset inventory? We were talking about this before, right? If you look at the SANS CIS top controls, it's know your hardware and software inventory. Okay, I get that. And then I got to do my vuln checks. Okay, check, and I got to do right. And so this one's a little too generic for me at the top of it because it's like, well, depending on the organization, what do you consider fundamentals based on where you are in your programs?
I actually related with that one because I've run into so many cases where they've been looking at the new and shiny stuff and forgetting the fundamentals. I mean, there have been some recent articles about, ancient attacks that are actually working now because people forgot to do, like, go back and patch old systems or, don't go crazy opening things up for a lighter weight security model. It's like, don't forget the past is the way I looked at it. And it might be a little oversimplified as in the article, but my thinking was, don't look way up here and forget about what's down below. That'll get you into trouble.
I don't disagree with you, but what I would love to see laid out here is don't forget about asset inventory. Don't forget about vulnerability and patching. Don't forget about users in here. Because when you look at number one, focus on the fundamentals, and then you look at number 4 where it says defending against ransomware attacks. How do you think you defend against ransomware attacks? By doing the fundamentals, right? It's like, so why is it listed twice?
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap.
Go ahead, Adrian.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, to be fair to CIS, I think they actually do break it's now a top 18. It's not 20 anymore. They folded a couple of them in. But I think they do segregate some of those out into, they call a certain subset. I was trying to find it here. But yeah, some of them are marked as fundamentals, and then, I think it's like the first, 8, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
the reason
the article
this list is really, really long, but some of these are so almost the same. Number 9, addressing IoT security. Well, again, aren't we going back to like fundamentals, asset management, basic security controls, some of the same things that we'd have to do for ransomware, right? So I could roll those 3 together almost as one. It's just how they break these down. Security by design. Let's see, we've been trying security by design for what, 9, 10, 20, 15 years? What? I can't even remember when the term first came up. That's also a fundamental component, isn't it? Like integrate security from the get-go.
At least 15. At least 15 years ago, I started hearing, bake in instead of bolt on.
Yeah. Anyways, I like I said, I didn't expect any surprises here. It's just the list seems a little long. If you're a CISO and you think about it, I mean, this is a lot on your plate that you got to try to manage on a day-to-day basis. I mean, can I consolidate some of this? Can I shrink this down to something a little more bite-sized and manageable? Because 15 to me just seems like a lot, and there is a lot of overlap between some of these when you think about the fundamentals and how do you do just basic cyber hygiene and protect against basic attacks, whether they're in the cloud, IoT, or on-prem. Like, aren't the principles roughly the same?
I feel like they decided on 15 before they wrote the article and picked the 15.
15's too many to keep in the forward gray matter. It's just too long a list. 5's probably about it before you're going to just start dropping things out the sides.
Yeah. Agreed.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Asset inventory, application, user data, and I'll give you one other one. We'll figure, risk management or something. Anyways, I could break this down to probably 5 and call it.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say it's one of the things I like about Sunil Yu's cyber defense matrix. Is it's just a 5x5 grid.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. That's it. Simple. CISA comes out and releases new guidelines for ransomware attacks. I mean, obviously, ransomware is top of mind. There's so much in the press these days. And again, you want to talk about fundamentals. That's what's guided here, right? Just the basics. It's, maintaining offline encrypted backups, doing basic cyber incident response planning, mitigating internet-facing vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, securing your remote desktop protocols and services, updating software. It's the basics, right? I like this because, the InfraGard survey that we're doing right now is around resiliency, around ransomware attacks. And a lot of these pieces that are here are coming out of the NIST guidelines that we use to create that initial survey to really measure the maturity across these different areas, because this is the basics. This is like the foundational elements. And if you're doing them right, you're in a much better position to mitigate ransomware attacks.
Well, one of the neat things in the guide from CISA is it also covers how to respond to it as well, not just how to prevent them, but what to do if it happens, which is useful. If you're already looking at this part, you should look at the other part too, because there's more information you can use, as well as I was halfway expecting to it, and I finally found it that they have their new stopransomware.gov site referenced in there as well, which is a lot of good information. I still believe not enough people know where to look to get good information about what to do to not only potentially stop, but also what to do when it happens and where they can find resources to take care of
that. Yeah, and it ties into the next article, because this article is kind of in tandem with this one from the CISA guidelines, because this next article talks about the 7 steps to protect yourself from lawsuits, which is not only the preparatory steps, but also what do you do when the attack actually happens to mitigate potential
when
lawsuits?
It fails.
Yeah, exactly right.
Something else I really like that CISA released like maybe a month ago was, and it wasn't just CISA, it was in tandem with a bunch of other international organizations, I think, but it was a list of top CVEs, of top vulnerabilities that got exploited largely by ransomware crews in 2020. So I think that's super useful too. Again, talking about how to prioritize things so you're not trying to tackle everything at once. Like, okay, give me a top 10 CVs. Like if I've got any of these products in my environment, I definitely want to make sure I've got these things patched.
Right, like basic risk-based, threat-based vulnerability analysis, right? If a vulnerability has an active exploit in the wild and it's active being used for these ransomware campaigns, it should sit a little higher on the criticality list than some other CVE.
But because reporting hasn't been ubiquitous, and the FBI has been getting involved in a lot more of these than normal, and other government organizations also, we haven't always really known. Like, we've known, okay, it's being exploited in the wild, but that last missing piece was, this vulnerability was largely responsible for this breach occurring. Like we didn't have those things tightly tied together. You get bits and pieces from different vendor reports and things like that. Certain ransomware groups, preferred certain exploits or something like that. But I think this is the first time I've really seen kind of a compilation of, if you got any of these issues, you're getting owned.
Well, one of the interesting things I heard from a friend of mine was that we were talking about cyber insurance coverage, and apparently the cyber insurers, in my world, we're self-insured. That's why I'm picking up other data points, is that they're now requiring MFA, DLP, and more of the cyber basics to be in place before they'll take you on, which is kind of an interesting trend because they're trying to raise the bar on the performance of the business, which then comes back into the basics in these articles we're seeing. You got to get the basics right to reduce the risk. And talk about accepting risk, that's your insurer. So it's all there.
Right. And if you get a ransomware attack, but one of the first things you have to do is call your cyber insurer, because they play the fiduciary and they get involved like right from the beginning, right? If you have cyber insurance in play, that's one of the first phone calls you're going to make. And it talks about this in the second article around consider insurance coverage, but you also have to understand the obligations when you're under an attack of what you need to do to actually potentially get a payout, because the insurers have gotten a lot smarter because there's been so many of these attacks. There are loopholes in some of these contracts. So make sure you know what's in those policies. Make sure you engage your cyber insurer when you're under attack, because it will impact whether you're eligible for payouts or not.
Yeah.
It also talks about this E&O, professional liability insurance. We talked a little bit on the last segment about the SolarWinds CISO being named in a lawsuit. D&O insurance for your directors potentially is something you need to look at going forward, because you don't want to get your executives pulled into some of these lawsuits without some protections around them. So that there's some other things around an insurance perspective organizations might want to look at.
Yeah, that's a common conversation I'm seeing in some of the CISO forums that I'm in. Are folks talking about their personal liability insurance they have for what they do at work, which to me is kind of a mind-blowing concept that, the company you work for doesn't necessarily cover it. But it actually happened to me like over a decade ago. I remember I was driving, got into an accident, driving for work. I was a PCI QSA at the time, and I found out my personal insurance didn't cover me because I was driving for work. And, my company didn't have any insurance that covered me either, and the guy went and found an ambulance chaser, turned around, tried to sue me for over $100,000. And, I was pretty much on my own for that, which was kind of a shock to me, that the consulting firm I worked for didn't have any coverage for that. So yeah, personal liability for CISOs, and that was just, one QSA driving for work, not SolarWinds level, right. The lawsuits are a bit bigger at that level.
Yeah, they are, especially when you have lots of large corporations and federal agencies that were hacked as part of that, right?
Yeah.
They have some high-powered attorneys. So yeah, something to think about. Last article. A little different. I always bring in Vanessa Van Edwards' work when it makes sense. And I was thinking about remote world, disconnect with the physical people, the office, that kind of stuff. How to build a rock solid self-esteem in 8 weeks or less. I think a lot of people are struggling a little bit with this remote work and might be a little down in the dumps. So I pulled this article in because it gives you like this 8-week program of how maybe you can kind of reestablish self-esteem, improve your overall your overall demeanor and outlook on life. Not necessarily for CISOs, even though CISOs you might need some of this help. But I brought this article in because there's some of the first things on here is like do a social media cleanse and cut out your toxic friends and just clean up your environment. I thought that was really interesting because we see a lot of this like really crazy stuff going on social media today. There's a lot of back and forth, and I don't spend a lot of time on social media personally, but my wife does, and she'll bring this stuff up like, oh my God, the stuff that's going on. And some of the first steps is just like, maybe cut back and clean some of that stuff out. That by itself might go a long way in improving your outlook on life.
Yeah. I was reading through that and thinking, people need to choose where they're, who they're depending on for the opinion in themselves, but cutting down the inputs, the negative feeds, whether it's social media or toxic friends, or even, having a, squalor around your house. I mean, I love one of the cleanup environments. First step is, make your bed every day. I mean, we do that here. And I remember our daughter called a few years ago and it's like, Mom, do you make the bed every day? Yes, we do. Oh my God. Yes, we do. You gotta take control, build a positive environment for yourself.
It's a big thing. Like a lot of these really resonate with me because if there's a lot of clutter, sometimes when we record this, you'll see a bunch of stuff on that table. But most of the time it'll be fairly clean because it bothers me when it's not. And it doesn't mean that every room in the house has to be super clean and organized, No. But something I've learned is if you at least, and for me it's the home office, have one area that's clean and organized, then you can think more clearly. There's less distractions. If you're that type of person where clutter distracts you and causes you anxiety, but yeah, like a lot of these, like I think it's really easy these days to go from a work meeting, start a podcast, like even if you're going for a walk and getting exercise and doing something that's kind of healthy, like I will never finish listening to all the podcasts in the queue that I've got. And I've got to remember sometimes, maybe I'll go on a walk without earbuds in or something like that. Just take a break from constantly consuming information and articles and data.
Yeah. And don't forget to leverage that primary relationship in your life, whoever it is, as a supportive one, not a tear down one, to help recharge. And like you said, step away from that keyboard. Actually, my wife helps me with a fairly rigorous work-life balance here, or I'll spend, 12 hours a day on front of this thing, and that is not healthy. At least not for Lee, it's not. You need to.
I don't think it is. It's not for anybody, Lee. I mean, my wife's the same way. I start early, and if I'm not out of this office by a certain time, she comes a knocking, right? And that helps us kind of build that balance.
Yeah, so I'll share a couple of things that have helped me. When I started a company, I noticed I was working like 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I realized I needed to do something to break that up. And I started volunteering at an animal rescue, and I started doing it on a Friday morning because I typically didn't have any work meetings then. And the place where I was volunteering didn't really need anybody on weekends because everybody had, typically 9 to 5 work days. So, they had plenty of people on the weekends, and it was really good to break up my day. And now one of the things I do is I subscribe to HelloFresh. So I get all the ingredients for a recipe. You still have to make the whole thing. You still have to cook the whole thing, but the fact that I've got those is going to force me to cook. And I enjoy cooking. Cooking is one of those things that recharges me. And you get the micro wins here. Always feels like a win when make a good meal for the family and everybody likes it. So those are two things that have kind of helped me break up the day and get away from work.
And it probably forces you to get up, go to the store, get the ingredients, and then come back. Then you maybe go back to work, and then you cook the meal later. So
that's a nice thing about HelloFresh. All the ingredients get delivered to you, so I get to skip the store. I mean, I still have to go to the store for other things. But it is nice that, because some of these recipes, you're either never going to make it or you're going to get white truffle oil for one recipe, and that $20 bottle of truffle oil is just going to sit in the shelf forever. So it's nice that they send you exactly the amounts you need for each of these recipes.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing that I just remembered last week while I was in Maui, we were meeting a friend of ours, and the way she got time to meet with us was to put an appointment on her calendar that she then rigorously defended and said, "This is my meeting, and I'm not available," and it worked. And I know it sounds silly, but I put personal stuff on my work calendar. I may not put the disclose the event details, but then it happens.
I do that too. Yep. Protect your calendar.
I mean, with our calendars and our schedules, we have to. If we don't do that, we're never going to get that break for that meeting you have to have, or run to the store, or take your son to school, or whatever it is, right? You gotta block those times out.
Most valuable resource we've got is time.
Yes.
Absolutely. And with that, I'm going to give our listeners some of their time as well. Thank you, Lee, for filling in. Thank you, Adrian, as always. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.